in both time and space do reverberations last? Because on July 31st, 2002, a bomb went off, sending ripples that somehow made their way through the universe and around the world and are still shaking to this day. It's my honor to introduce and welcome Shana to the bima as she reflects on what that means, on those reverberations and the impacts they continue to make in the world today.
At Frankel Jewish Academy's ceremony for Yom HaZikaron, Israel Memorial Day this year, I learned that the theme that the Israeli government chose for this year's ceremonies was notification, focusing on the people, situations, and stories about when and how people heard the news and felt the impact of losing a relative, a friend, a love, a child. So I wanted you to think about that moment, the one it's in television and movies, the one where time stops, where the air is sucked out of the room, where the verbal bomb goes off. And while I sat there in the JCC's theater, I tried to remember who told me about Ben Blutstein and Marla Bennett. Where was I? I couldn't remember. You see, 20 years ago tomorrow, July 31st, 2002, I had just returned from my first year living in Israel. I moved into an apartment in New York City with 2 friends, and I was working while I got ready to begin my graduate studies at NYU. It had been a crazy year to be in Israel. It was the second year of the Second Intifada. It began with 9/11, included many more suicide bombings that I could count, and was a time where we were afraid to ride buses or go to a cafe. But in the middle of all of that, there was also a lot of joy. It was a tension between joy and grief. About living in Israel and studying that year, Marla Bennett wrote, "Here in Jerusalem, I found a community of seekers, people who, like me, who want to try living in another country, who want to know more about Judaism, people who are trying to figure out exactly what they want their lives to look like. The air is charged with our debates and discussions as we try to assimilate into our lives all that we've learned. Life here is magical." Marla wrote these words that I could have written. I, too, was a student that year at the Pardes Institute in Jerusalem, and it was an incredible community. We were mostly in our 20s, excited to learn about and challenge Judaism, and even more excited to build community together. So at the end of that incredible year, back in New York, I got a call. Marla and Ben had been having lunch together with our friend Jamie in the Frank Sinatra cafeteria at Hebrew University. They were gone, murdered. Jamie was fighting for her life, and the world stopped. I don't remember who told me, but I remember who I told. I called Rebecca. I didn't know until after that call that Rebecca had just started dating Ben. They were going to date long distance and figure it out. She was on the street in New York, also getting ready to start grad school at NYU. She was so happy when she answered with a joyful and bubbly voice. They were a great pair because Ben Blutstein, was a joyful guy. He was filled with contradictions. He was a Talmud scholar and a techno DJ in cutting-edge Israeli dance clubs. He would drive us crazy making music by pounding on everything he could reach. And he was also a big teddy bear who gave great hugs. He was joyful in dancing and celebrating any simcha, and he was a recovering alcoholic at 25 years old. Marla Bennett was one of those infectiously happy people. She had an incredible smile and loved rainbows and taking notes with colorful pens. To this day, our family follows a tradition that comes from Marla. We have Rainbow Shabbat on Parshat Noach, when we learn about Noah and the flood, and the rainbow promise between God and humans. She was a California girl who loved her Jewish camp. Marla was also my friend Michael's girlfriend, and he was a couple of weeks away from proposing to her. The moment when time stops, where the air is sucked out of the room. 20 years ago, I went to their funerals, one in Pennsylvania and one in San Diego, and time stopped for each one. In 1976, the famous Israeli author Yehuda Amichai wrote, "The diameter of the bomb was 30 centimeters, and the diameter of effective range about 7 meters, with 4 dead and 11 wounded, and around these, in a larger circle of pain and time, 2 hospitals are scattered and 1 graveyard. But the young woman who was buried in the city she came from, at a distance of more than 100 kilometers, enlarges the circle considerably. And the solitary man mourning her death at the distant shores of a country far across the sea includes the entire world in the circle. And I won't even mention the crying of orphans that reaches up to the throne of God and beyond, making a circle with no end and no God." But I want to add to Amichai, because in this bomb's diameter are also dozens of babies, now young men and women, named after Marla. There are memories of the community that helped each other grieve, went to each other's weddings, and celebrated life the way that Marla and Ben would want us to. Shalom and I met at one such wedding just 2 months later, and we learned that we were both among the hundreds who attended Marla's funeral and were part of a community of mourners around the world. There are hundreds of people who also learned from Marla to have Rainbow Shabbat and learned to celebrate and dance from Ben. There are Jewish educators who go to Israel to this day on scholarships named after them. In a midrash called Besikta Rabati, the rabbis talked about this contradiction between mourning and joy related to Tisha B'Av. They said in the name of Abaye, joy only comes in the 9th of Av, because they mandated mourning then at this time, and in the future the Holy One will make it into a holiday, as it says in Jeremiah, "And I will turn their mourning into joy, and I will comfort them and make them rejoice from their sorrow." As we enter the 9 days of mourning leading up to Tisha B'Av, next Saturday night and Sunday, we can also know that according to our tradition, Tisha B'Av will also be the day that the Messiah comes, a day of eternal joy. I remember Ben and Marla, and we thank them for the joy they brought into our world. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Shana.